This is Terry Wagar. The date today is August 7th, 2015. There's a red pickup truck that the Portland cops that are surrounding my apartment has. I've already got the Portland cop, the driver of that pickup truck, on video wearing his Portland police uniform. They have control of the apartment right here to my left, and they have control of the apartment here. This is my cane. They have control of the apartment here to my right. Now, I've already got video of this Portland cop that drives that red pickup truck. He follows me around when I leave my apartment. It's easy for them to track and follow me because I'm disabled. I'm on SSI. I don't leave my apartment except maybe like once a month. On rare occasion, I might leave twice a month. I usually have to, when I leave here, it's usually when I get my SSI check, and I usually go grocery shopping and pay bills and pay the rent and stuff like that. So I basically generally just leave once, maybe twice a month. Usually at the beginning of the month, so they know my schedule. These Portland cops that are surrounding my apartment know my schedule. They have me surrounded. The Portland police have taken control of this apartment here to my right. They've taken control of this apartment to my left. They have direct control of the apartment directly below mine. The one that's directly below mine, they usually have their civilian performers, their civilian sting ops in this one, in that apartment. They're the ones that are usually putting on the street theater performances, and they usually do this when I leave my apartment. They'll stage some sort of a street theater performance where they essentially ambush me at the bottom of the stairs when I leave my apartment. As you can see, I'm like on the second floor here, and I have to go down the stairs in order to exit this building, and they usually ambush me right at the bottom of the stairs in some form of a street theater performance where they have their civilian operatives performing for the Portland Police Department's illegal video surveillance cameras. They're doing this for the purpose of staging and for framing, because they were trying to set me up for crimes. They already gave me blame for crimes, of which the sting operatives that were targeting me were the ones guilty of the crimes, but they were setting me up to get the blame, and they had a Portland cop by the name of Officer Eric Carlson, as well as other people that I don't know their names. They had other people impersonating me, and they were performing for street theater surveillance and for photogenic photo purposes. You have to understand, to be targeted by a sting means you're surrounded by multiple organized people that are either in law enforcement. It's a combination usually of people that are in law enforcement and people that are connected to law enforcement. Such as law enforcement's buddies and law enforcement officers' relatives and law enforcement officers' girlfriends. And they just surround their target. They use their police powers to take over the surrounding apartments. All apartment managers, all landlords, for the most part, go along with police sting operations, which means your apartment manager or your landlord won't tell you if police officers are taking over the surrounding apartments surrounding yours and that they're targeting you and your family. They won't tell you that. Apartment managers and landlords illegally cooperate with police sting operations to the point where they're co-conspirators of the crimes in which the sting operations are committing. Now, I usually quite a few times when I make a vlog, I usually don't bother doing a selfie. The reason I don't have no qualm whatsoever recording myself whatsoever in a selfie at all. I don't even give a damn if anybody knows who I am or what I look like. My name's Terry Wagar. I have a history of saving lives in the city of Portland, Oregon. I'm known for saving lives in the city of Portland, Oregon. I'm a good person. I have a history of doing good things. I'm not afraid of a bunch of criminals and pedophiles and serial killers and law enforcement. Now, the reason I usually don't do a selfie is when I record these vlogs is because of the fact that usually when I make a vlog, the sting operatives that are surrounding my apartment usually become quite active, and then they'll start staging street theater performances, and they'll start walking back and forth in front of my walkway here. They usually do it as a form of provoking. Normally I keep my shades closed because of the fact that I am surrounded by sting operatives, and their constant harassment is just annoying. It's annoying. But since I'm recording a vlog and they generally like to be active when I recorded a vlog, or when I record vlogs, I chose to open my shade for this vlog. Not to mention I wanted to reaffirm the fact that on this particular date, the Portland cops surrounding my apartment are still surrounding my apartment, are still here, are still present. That red pickup truck, it's a Portland cop. And he has two other adults that are actively working with him in this operation. I don't know if they're the two other people are cops or not. I don't know, but I know the main dude that's taken over that apartment. He is a Portland cop. I already have him on video driving away in that red pickup truck, wearing his Portland police uniform. And I caught that on video last year, right when these particular operatives first started taking over these apartments. They already had these apartments, but their cover was blown, so they changed out the operatives. They didn't move out the shit. When you're surrounded by a sting operation and the sting operatives' cover's blown, what they do is they just change the people. They don't actually move out and take their shit with them. When police and or county sheriff take over the surrounding apartments, and they fill those surrounding apartments with their operatives and the furnishings that law enforcement uses to furnish the apartments that they're taking over for their sting operation. When their sting operatives' cover gets blown, they don't have the sting ops move out and then take the shit with them and then bring in new sting ops with all new shit. They don't do that. They just change out the sting ops, and then they just have new sting ops come in, and then they just act like these new sting ops have just always been here, and that's how they behave, and that's how they act, and that's how they function. And the apartment managers or landlords go along with this shit. And if you confront the apartment manager or the landlord over this, they'll just look you in the face and outright lie. They'll just outright lie, and they don't even care. They don't even care if I've already proved that I'm surrounded by Portland cops. But I have the apartment manager here where I live, at Misty Firs Apartments, on audio, literally lying to my face, saying there is no Portland cops surrounding my apartment. And that's just bullshit. She's just a liar and a sting op for the Portland police and for the Multnomah County Sheriff's, and she just lies for their asses and doesn't give a damn if I know.
Sting ops don't fear prosecution. Anybody that participates in police sting operations, they have no fear of prosecution, and they lie all the time. And they don't even give a damn if they're caught in lies. Well, the apartment manager is caught on audio lying for these cops. Now, I've already had them on video going to that red pickup truck, coming from these surrounding apartments and going to that red pickup truck, and they're wearing and driving away, and they're wearing their police uniforms. And apartment manager, I have already on audio after the fact, outright lying to me, saying there is no Portland cops renting apartments around here. So she's just outright lying. And that's how sting ops are. They'll outright lie, and they just cover one another's ass outright, and don't give a shit if anybody knows they're lying. Because there's not a soul that will arrest their ass for it, and they know it. So they just don't give a damn. Now, the reason I'm targeted by sting operations is because of the fact that, well, for one thing, ever since I was 6 years old, which was back in 1971, me and my family became targeted by a Multnomah County Sheriff's sting operation. It was the Multnomah County Sheriffs and the Dunham family. The Dunham family were, they lived at a house 2 houses away from where I lived. They literally lived on the same block that I lived on in 1971. They were our neighbors. They were like they lived 2 houses away from where I lived. And I was only 6 years old at the time. And in 1971, the Multnomah County Sheriff and the Dunham family framed a neighbor that lived a block away as a pedophile. And it was the Multnomah County Sheriffs and the Dunham's family that did the framing. And it was the Dunham family that was aiding and abetting and assisting the Multnomah County Sheriffs in framing that neighbor as a pedophile. And it was a Multnomah County Sheriff officer that was acting as a photo double of the person that they were framing. And the county sheriff officer that was acting as the double was inside their target's home when their target wasn't there. So, in other words, when their target was not home, and the home of the target was not occupied, that's when the Multnomah County Sheriff took control of the house and put a double in it. And they had a Multnomah County Sheriff officer tossing candy bars at children. And it was the Dunham family that brought the children to that house specifically for that purpose. And it was Darlene Dunham, the mother of the Dunham family, in 1971 that did this. And she brought her children and neighbor children that she rounded up to that house for this Multnomah County Sheriff officer to toss candy bars at the children. And it was Darlene Dunham that was using a Multnomah County Sheriff's camera to take photogenic photos of her children and the neighbor children picking up these candy bars that the county sheriff's was tossing at the children. And it was Darlene Dunham that was, she's the one that brought her children and the neighbor children to that house for this purpose. And I happened to be one of the neighbor children she rounded up for this purpose. Now, I was only 6 years old at the time. I had no clue what was going on. She was babysitting me under false pretenses. She lied to my mother, telling my mother that she was taking her children to the park and that she wanted to know if she could take me along with. And my mother didn't suspect anything foul about that. And my mother consented and said, yeah, I can go along with her. So I was technically under the care of Darlene Dunham during this trip. And I was under the impression that they were taking me to the park. Now, Darlene Dunham lied to my mother and didn't take me to the park. She took me to a house that's a block away from where I lived. And she was she ordered her children and me to go across the street and go into somebody's yard. And we did what we were told. Keep in mind, I'm being babysitted by Darlene Dunham, and it's 1971. Kids don't backtalk their adults back then. Not that I'm aware of, anyway. I'm only 6 years old at the time. I didn't understand what was going on, but technically I'm being babysitted by her at this point, and you know, you do what your elders tell you to do. So I didn't question it, but I was confused by it. When we got into that yard of that house, that's when the county sheriff officer started tossing candy bars at the Dunham children and at me. And the Dunham children immediately began picking up the candy bars and was grinning and laughing and playing while doing so. I was confused, didn't know what was going on, and I turned around and looked over across the street towards where Darlene Dunham was standing. And that's when I noticed that she had a big green camera, all metal, all green camera in her hand. And she was taking photogenic photos of her children and of me while the county sheriffs were tossing these candy bars at us. And I said to Darlene Dunham, "Am I supposed to pick these up?" And Darlene Dunham lowered the camera from her face. And that's when I noticed that Darlene Dunham was grinning from ear to ear. And she was nodding her head, saying, "Yeah, pick up the candy bars." And then she raised the camera back up to her face again. Now, I had no idea what was going on. I had no clue what was going on, but I did what I was told. So I picked up the candy bars. And after 5-10 minutes of this, the county sheriff officer didn't have any more candy bars anymore, and he said, "That's it, that's enough." And then he walked away from the window, because he was in the house of the target. He was impersonating the target that lived there. And he didn't place himself in front of the window, but because of where I was out in the yard, I could see him in his uniform. The only part of his body that he kept, the only part of his body the county sheriff kept visible was his arm. That's it. He didn't keep any other part of his body visible. So the only part of him that Darlene Dunham took photogenic photos of was his arm, as it's resting on the windowsill and as it's holding up candy bars. But I could see him through the window, and he was wearing a Multnomah County Sheriff's uniform. Now, I was only 6. Keep in mind, it's 1971. I'm only 6 years old at the time. I didn't even have a TV in 1971. My family didn't get a TV until 1972. I'm only 6 years old. I know virtually nothing about crime or covert crime or sting operations. I know nothing about framing or doubles or impersonating. I knew nothing about anything when it came to crime at all. I didn't even know what the hell a Multnomah County Sheriff officer even was. Now, I seen the county sheriff officer in his uniform and seen what it looked like, but I didn't know what it represented. I had no clue what it represented. When the county sheriff officer was done tossing these candy bars at us, that's when Darlene Dunham yelled at her children and at me to cross the street to head back towards her. And once we got back to her, Darlene Dunham and her children were in celebration mode. And they were openly referring to the person at that moment. While they're celebrating, keep in mind, they're all grins, they're all laughs, they're all celebrating. And they were openly at this moment referring to the person that lived at that house as a pedophile. Now, I'm only 6 years old, didn't know what the hell was going on. I was confused, and I asked them, what's a pedophile? And Darlene Dunham and her children, they just grinned at me and didn't answer my question. But they're still grinning, and they're still celebrating, and they ignored my question, and then Darlene Dunham said to her children, "After we take Terry back to his house, we're all going to go out for a pizza." So they're discussing how they're going to celebrate what they just did. Now, keep in mind, I was only 6 years old, had no clue what the hell was going on. It's 1971. I didn't have a TV. I didn't even have a TV yet. And I didn't know what the hell a pizza was. I knew what a restaurant was. I knew what a hamburger joint was. I knew what hamburgers and french fries was. But in 1971, my own family never went out for pizza, so I didn't know what the hell a pizza was. So I asked them, what's a pizza? So they spent about half that block as they're walking me back home, explaining to me what a fucking pizza was. And as they're explaining to me what a pizza was, that's when I noticed Darlene Dunham was taking out the photogenic photos that she took out of this big, giant, all green, all metal camera. And I asked her, not realizing what the purpose of those photos even are, but knowing I'm on those photos, I asked Darlene Dunham, oh, gee, could I have one of those photos? Because I thought it would be cool if I could have one, because I knew I was on the photogenic photos. So I asked if I could have one. She told me, no, these are special photos, maybe some other time. And that's when I got a really good and really close look at the camera that Darlene Dunham was using. I was very curious about that camera. Keep in mind, this was 1971. It was a very big camera that Darlene Dunham was using. Have you ever seen a movie, like a 1950s or 1960s movie, where you see like a crime scene and you see like detectives or news reporters with those big cameras with the big flashbulb canisters on top of the cameras, and they're snapping photogenic photos of a crime scene? It was a big camera like that, kind of like that, but it was newer looking than those cameras that you see in the 50s and 60s. It was more modern looking, but it was still big, just like those cameras that you would see in the movies from like the 1950s and 60s, like in a crime scene movie or something. I was very curious about the camera because I never seen a camera in real life that big, and I was very curious. And I was very curious about the camera. I asked Darlene Dunham as she was walking me back home, can I carry the camera for her? Because I just wanted to see how heavy it was, because I was very curious. Because my own family had cameras, but not big like that. I mean, this was a ginormous camera that Darlene, from my 6-year-old perspective, it was a ginormous camera that she was using. And it had this it was all metal, all green, Multnomah County Sheriff green, and it had a big round yellow seal on it. And I didn't know what that seal stood for. I'm only 6 years old at the time. I couldn't read. It had wording on it, but I couldn't read it. But it had a big, round, yellow seal on the camera. I didn't know what that seal represented, but I never forgot what the seal looked like. It was a Multnomah County Sheriff's seal. But I didn't know that at the time. Well, suffice it to say, the Dunham family dropped me off back at my home, and I went inside my home with a fistful of candy bars and was munching on one of the candy bars, and my mother asked me, where did you get all those candy bars? And I said, now keep in mind, I'm only 6 years old. I didn't understand what was going on. I wasn't aware that the Dunhams and the Multnomah County Sheriffs framed that neighbor as a pedophile. I didn't even know what the word pedophile even meant, and I didn't know that the person that was tossing the candy bars at me was a county sheriff officer. And I didn't know that the Dunhams was using a camera that belonged to the Multnomah County Sheriffs. But my mother's asking me, where did I get these candy bars? So you have to understand, my limited 6-year-old perception of what took place was, nice lady takes me for a walk. Nice lady takes me to meet nice man. Nice man gives us candy bars. Nice lady takes photos of it. Nice lady takes me home. That was my limited perspective of what took place based on my age and based on my understanding of what I witnessed, based on my limited understanding. And keep in mind, the Dunham family were openly referring to the person that lived at that house after they got done framing the neighbor as a pedophile. They were openly referring to the person as a pedophile. Now, I didn't know what that word meant, but they were openly referring to the person as a pedophile. And I already knew the dude wore a uniform and didn't know what the uniform represented. And I didn't even know what the word pedophile even represented. Now, keep in mind, my mother's asking me, where did you get those candy bars? So here's how I answered her question honestly, based on my understanding of what just happened. I told my mother, oh, they took me to meet a nice pedophile. He gave them to us. I said that when I was only 6 years old. That was my understanding of what took place. And I didn't know what that word pedophile even meant. Now, you can imagine my mother's reaction to that statement. My mother's jaw dropped in shock, utter horror and shock at what I just said. And then my mother, acting shocked and angry, said, "You stay right there." And then my mother bolted out the door, chasing after the Dunham family. Now, at this point, I knew my mother was mad. I didn't know what's going on. I thought maybe I might be in trouble for something. Did I do something wrong? I was kind of scared at that moment because I thought, have I done something wrong? I was scared. I was afraid I was going to get spanked for something because I didn't understand what was going on, and I was afraid at that point because my mother was mad and angry and shocked, and I didn't understand why. Now, I'm going to have to assume that county sheriff officer that was in that house, that was acting as a double, I'm going to have to assume he was waiting at the Dunham's house to retrieve his camera and his photogenic photos that Darlene Dunham took for him. So when my mother went 2 houses next door, 2 houses away, to confront the Dunhams over this and to find out what the hell's going on, I'm going to have to assume that my mother was met by the Dunham family and by this Multnomah County Sheriff officer that was in uniform. Now, I don't know what explanations that the Dunham family or the county sheriff officer gave my mother, but my mother was gone for about 15, 20 minutes. And when my mother came back after chasing after the Dunham family, when she came back to the house, she didn't say a word to me about what happened, and she wasn't questioning me any further as to what was going on. So I'm going to have to assume that the Dunham family and the Multnomah County Sheriff officer lied to my mother, gave my mother some bullshit story, and probably even said something to her of the effect of, don't question your son about this because he doesn't understand what's going on. So, don't say anything to him. It's best that he just doesn't understand or best that he doesn't know. Now, I don't know what story they told my mother, but my mother seemed to be satisfied with whatever answer the Dunhams and the county sheriffs gave her. And she didn't question me any further. I wish to God she did. Well, from this point forward, me and my entire family have been targeted by Multnomah County sheriffs and by Portland police sting operations and by their civilian buddies and by their civilian relatives and by their civilian girlfriends. They used me in an operation in 1971 to frame a neighbor as a pedo using doubles of photogenic photos. And then they targeted me and every member of my family because I'm a witness and I made mention of it. Now, they knew damn well I didn't know what was going on and didn't understand what was going on. And ever since I made mention of this is when Darlene Dunham, literally 10 days after this incident occurred, Multnomah County Sheriff detective, dressed like a detective, not in uniform, but dressed like a detective, showed up at our door. And he was demanding to have access to our basement. And he was coercing and pressuring my mother into letting him into the home for the purpose of inspecting our basement. And my mother didn't want to let him in, but he was being coercive and insisting he was implying my mother may be arrested if my mother didn't give her entry into the home. He didn't say it that way, but he sure as hell was implying it. Out of fear and terror, my mother consented, but only out of fear and terror. My mother was afraid of this man, and it was just my mother and me that was home at the time. My father was at work, my older brother, he was in school, so it was just my mother and me that was home at the time. And the Multnomah County Sheriff insisted my mother go down in the basement with her, and the Multnomah County Sheriff insisted that I stay on the main floor. Now, my mother and this county sheriff officer was only in the basement for about, I would say, a minute, 2 minutes tops. They weren't down there for very long. About long enough to have a very short conversation, basically. And then they both came back up from the basement to the main floor, and then the detective let himself out of the house. And when the detective left, my mother told me, don't ever answer the door, ever again. So my mother was definitely scared of this county sheriff officer. She feared this county sheriff officer. And I was under the impression that that this person was making threats or something to my mother. Now keep in mind, I'm only 6 years old. My understanding of the world is limited, extremely limited. Particularly in the field of understanding crime. I had no concept of crime. I had a sense of right or wrong, but I had no sense of crime, meaning I witnessed crimes taking place and I had no clue that they were crimes. Because I was only 6. And ever since the county sheriffs and the Dunhams used me in this operation, and then I made mention to my mother about what they did, from this point forward, me and my entire family have been targeted by sting operations. Now, after this county sheriff officer pressured and or coerced my mother into silence, from that point forward, the Dunham family was heavily ingratiating themselves unto my mother, trying to befriend her. And for about 2 weeks, the Dunham family was palling around. The mother of the Dunham family was palling around with my mother, calling her every single day, trying to act like her. She was pretending to be my mother's best friend. She was trying to ingratiate herself into my mother's life and to earn my mother's trust. And after 2 weeks of this bullshit, that's when Darlene Dunham told my mother that she's going to be taking her kids to the movie theater, and she wanted to know if she could take me along with. Now, my mother consented, stupidly consented. Now, I don't know what lies they told. I don't know what the lies are that they told my mother in regards to what's going on, but they did have the wool pulled over my mother's eyes. And keep in mind, my limited understanding was what was preventing me from understanding what was going on. Looking back on it, for me anyway, it was blatant as hell. But they were taking advantage of my ignorance. They were taking advantage of my mother's ignorance of police sting operations. I knew nothing about law enforcement or sting operations. And to be honest, I don't think my mother really knew much about law enforcement and knew nothing about sting operations herself. But they talked my mother into letting me go along with them to the movies. Now, this is about a month after the Dunham family and the county sheriff framed a neighbor as a pedo using doubles and photogenic photos. And they just spent time lying to my mother. They lied to my mother. They threatened my mother. They coerced my mother. And now they're ingratiating themselves into my mother's lives in order to have further access to me. Now, this fucking went on for years. me and my entire family were targeted by these people for years. The Dunham family spent the rest of that year and part of the next year taking me to the movie theaters, and they were taking me to see very inappropriate movies that children are not supposed to be taken to. And they did this for the purpose of traumatizing me in a movie theater. And at the same time, they were having plainclothes county sheriff officers snapping photogenic photos of me. And Darlene Dunham and her children made me sit alone in the movie theaters. I didn't get to sit next to them. I'm taken to the movie theaters with them, but they would make me sit alone in the movie theaters. The Dunham family made me, at the age of 6 years old, sit in movie theaters to watch very sick and disgusting movies while plainclothes county sheriff officers are snapping photogenic photos of me. This shit went on for a year. And it basically went on until I started to complain. The moment I started to complain, that's when the county sheriffs and the Dunham family switched gears and were no longer focusing on me anymore. And they began focusing on my brother, Harold Wager, and on my father, Don Wager. So for throughout all of 1971 and early part of 1972, they were heavily targeting me and my mother. And the latter half of 72 and all of 73, they were very heavily targeting my brother and father. Very heavily. In 1973, that's when the Dunham family found out that I still remembered what happened in 1971. And when they made that realization, that's when the Multnomah County Sheriff switched gears, and they began having me and my brother and my father gang-stalked and poisoned. Right after the Dunham family found out in 73 that I still remembered what happened in 71, that's when the poisonings and the batteries began. Because that's when me and my brother were being ganged up on by gangs of people at our schools and became beaten. And it wasn't these gangs of people that were beating me and my brother that were getting the blame. It was me and my brother that the schools were giving the blame to. And they kicked my brother out of school, and they kicked me out of the school. Now, I'm only 8 years old at the time, and they kicked me out of fucking school. And they used the fact that I was in a fight as their excuse for kicking me out of school. Now, keep in mind, I was ganged up on by a sting operation, and it's the sting ops brats that were ganging up on me and my brother. And schools were just auto-blaming me and my brother for everything. And so me and my brother ended up getting beaten up by sting ops brats, and then the schools would blame me and my brother, and me and my brother got kicked out of school. Keep in mind, I'm in a completely different school than my brother is, but gee, he's going through the same thing I'm going through. And he's kicked out of school the same year I'm kicked out, even though we're in two separate schools. Now, the county sheriff used their influence with the counselors and the principals and the teachers at the schools to have me kicked out. And then they ordered the schools to tell my family in writing that I can't go back to school unless they put me on a prescription. And then the school said in writing what prescription they have to put me on before I could be allowed to go back into school. It was some sort of what it was, I don't know. At the time, I didn't know what it was. My parents didn't even know what it was. It has some sort of a weird, long-ass clinical name. We didn't know what the hell it was. But my parents, not being aware that we're targeted by a sting operation, me and my own brother were not aware that we're being targeted by a sting operation. We didn't question any of this. We just, So my parents put me on that prescription. I think they did the same thing to my brother as well, I think. I'm not clear on that, though. They might not have. But I have reason to believe that they did. But if they did, I'm unaware of it. I'll put it this way. I didn't find out what that prescription was until I was 18 years old. When I was 18 years old, I looked up that clinical name to find out what the fuck that shit was they had me they prescribed to me. It was fucking speed. So in 1973, when the Dunham family found out that I still remembered what they did in 1971, that's when the Dunham family told the county sheriffs, and county sheriffs used their fascist police powers to gang up on me and my brother at our schools to basically get us into trouble, and then to blame me and my brother. And then they used that as their excuse to kick me out of school and to put me on a prescription of fucking speed. So they were fucking poisoning me and trying to cause memory loss and brain damage on me when I'm only 8 years old. And I didn't find out what that shit was until I was 18. My own family, my own parents didn't know what the hell that shit was either. You got to understand, me and my family, we were completely unaware that we were targeted by a sting. And we're unaware of the tactics that sting ops use. Sting ops are people in law enforcement and their buddies and their relatives and their girlfriends. And they gang up on anybody they target. And sting ops will stage and commit any fucking crime for the purpose of framing and blaming their target. Me and my family became targeted, not because we're under investigation, not because anybody in my family did anything wrong. We're being targeted because I'm a witness to the sting operations, framing a neighbor, and made mention of it to my family. By 1974, my father was being heavily gang-stalked. My brother was being heavily gang-stalked. I was somewhat being gang-stalked. I was not as heavily as my brother and father were. I was being partially gang-stalked. They switched gears mostly and were targeting mostly my brother and my father in 73 and 74. I became a major target of it as well, but they were focusing mostly on my older brother, and my father in 73 and 74. I'm a secondary target at this point because they know that I don't understand what's going on. Even though I remembered what they did in 71, they also know at the same time that I'm completely clueless to the fact that they framed that neighbor. And so they know I'm still naive and ignorant and unaware of what took place. By 1974, they were poisoning my father. My father was going to emergency hospital. The county sheriffs and the police were just using their influence at the hospital to cover up the poisoning and to deny my father any form of emergency assistance. They did the same thing to my brother, and my brother was my father, because of the fact that he was being gang-stalked at his place of employment in 73 and 74 by the sting operation. Because of their interference and influence at my father's place of employment, my father lost his career. He lost his job. And because he became poisoned, he became disabled. And because they covered up the poisoning at the hospital, he had no way to get help for it. Well, while that is going on, they're basically doing the exact same thing to me and my brother at me and my brother's schools. And they were heavily gang-stalking my brother. He was my older brother was the weakest link in my family because he was partially retarded. He was born partially retarded. So my older brother was the weakest link in my family, and he was the one that they were ganging up on the most. I didn't know what was going on, and they were keeping me poisoned using fucking speed and God knows whatever the hell else. And they had my father jobless, penniless, disabled, and unable to get help for it. And my brother was being heavily ganged up on, and he couldn't leave. Literally in '74, he couldn't leave my home without being blamed for something or beaten. And he was in terror in '74. He was quite literally terrorized and was afraid for his life. He was scared and didn't understand because from his perspective, everybody was ganging up on him, and he didn't know why and didn't understand why. My brother was only 5 years older than me. In 1974, I was 9 years old. So my brother was like 9, 10, 11, 12. My brother was like 13 years old in 1974, 12, 13 years old. And he's partially retarded. And he didn't understand what was going on. All he knows, everybody was ganging up on him. Nobody was taking his word for anything. Nobody seemed to care that he was a victim, and he was scared. He didn't do anything wrong, but everybody was ganging up on him, and he didn't know why. My father didn't know what was going on or understand what was going on and didn't know why all this is happening either. And I didn't understand what was going on, but I knew a lot of people turned, in '74, a lot of people were turned against me and my family, and I didn't know why. In '74, me and my father and my brother were quite literally scared to even leave our home because we were being openly gang-stalked and beaten and terrorized. They were covertly poisoning me and my brother at the time, and I didn't know it. My brother didn't know it. As an adult looking back on it, I know damn well they were poisoning my brother because he described the symptoms he was suffering from, and it was poisoning symptoms. But because I'm only 8, 9 years old back then, I didn't understand understand what the symptoms even mean. I'm only a kid. The county sheriff and the Dunham family had my brother committed after they vilified him and poisoned him and gang-stalked him and beat him. They had him committed. No trial, no testimony, no jack shit. County sheriffs and the Portland police just show up like a fucking mob, pretend everything they do is legal and official. They just take my brother away, and then there's never a trial. And we never got my brother back. My brother was only 12, 13 years old at the time. My father was disabled, jobless, penniless. He was poisoned and unable to get help at the hospital because of the county sheriff's influence. I am only 9 years old at this point, scared to death, scared to even leave my fucking home, because I already know a lot of people turned against us and ganged up on us, and I don't even know why or understand why. And I was afraid what happened to my brother was going to happen to me next. Two weeks after the county sheriff and the Portland police took my brother away, of which he never got a trial over anything, and nobody in my family ever got to testify on or to speak in a courtroom on his behalf. He was just taken away, and he's just gone. 2 weeks after that, the Dunhams And the Multnomah County Sheriffs were setting me up to be shot. And they shot at me at Selwood Park here in Portland, Oregon. 2 weeks after they took my brother away. It was Kurt Dunham that wanted me to go to the Selwood Park with him. He's trying to act like a friend. He still knows that I don't know what's going on. I'm clueless as to what's going on. And he's using the same tactics that Darlene Dunham used on my mother. He's ingratiating himself unto me, trying to act like a friend, when in fact he's just trying to set me up to be killed. He wanted me to go to Selwood Park with him, and this is 2 weeks after my brother was taken away. And once we got to Selwood Park, 2 dudes in camels with pellet rifles started shooting at me. They're in camos. They even have the camel paint shit on their fucking faces. And they were shooting at me with pellet rifles. And they had what looked like handguns at their sides as well. So they had more than one. There were 2 dudes. Each of them had pellet rifles. And it looked like they had knives with them, because they had knives. They had a utility belt on with their camos, and on that utility belt they had knives, and they had what looked like a handgun in a holster. And while they were shooting at me, Kurt Dunham was grinning from fucking ear to ear. And he wasn't being shot at by them at all. And he was grinning from ear to ear. And he's saying, "Go after them! Go get them!" And he's grinning. He's pretending to hide behind the tree, just like I was trying to hide behind a tree, because they were shooting at me with pellet rifles. But they weren't shooting at him at all, and I noticed that. And he was grinning. I'm in shock. I'm in shock at what's happening, but Kurt Dunham was fucking grinning. Now, after when me and Kurt Dunham left, Kurt Dunham was grinning over it, and I noticed they weren't shooting at him at all. And I asked Kurt Dunham, in shock, I said, "Did they shoot at you too?" And he said, he lied, saying, "Yeah." But he was grinning the whole fucking time. So I knew damn well he was lying. I just didn't understand why. Why? I didn't understand, why are these people doing this, and why is the Dunhams always grinning over this weird shit that keeps happening? Why do they keep grinning? I didn't understand that I was a target of a sting. My family didn't understand we were a target of a sting. This is fucking sport to people in law enforcement and to their fucking civilian relatives and their civilian buddies and their civilian girlfriends. Right after the county sheriffs and the Dunham family had my brother and my father poisoned, and they had them kicked out of school, and they had my father lost his job, and they had my brother and my father disabled and debilitated, they vilified my brother, they mentalified my father, and they had my brother committed without a trial, and then 2 weeks later, they're setting me up at the age of 9 years old. They're setting me up to be killed. And it was Kurt Dunham that got me in that situation, that walked me into that situation, and he's the one saying to me, "Go after them, go get them." How many times have you seen on the news where cops have shot a kid and then cops fake justification? They'll say the cop had a toy gun. How many times have you seen that on the news? How many times around the country have you heard about that kind of a thing? All kids that are shot by cops are victims of sting operations, every single one of them, and it's the civilian operatives that are targeting kids that get those kids into those situations. In my particular case, I happen to be one of those kids they were setting up to be killed in that manner, and was yet to be aware of the fact that the Dunhams were sting ops and that they're relatives and are connected to people in the county sheriffs. And that this is sport to people in law enforcement. Now, I'm a witness to the fact that this not only do law enforcement and their relatives and their buddies and girlfriends do this shit to people, but that it's a sport to these fucking people. And they don't even give a damn if anybody knows. They don't even care. It wasn't until 1975 when right after I reached the age of 10 years old, I started showing an interest in watching the news on TV. And that's when I started becoming aware of local government and starting learning about local government and started learning about law enforcement and started seeing local law enforcement on TV and started seeing their uniforms and their badges and seeing them on TV talking with news reporters over various issues of the day. And that's when I first saw a Multnomah County Sheriff officer on TV, which was 1975, I'm thinking to myself, gee, that's the same fucking uniform that dude in 1971 was tossing candy bars at me. He was wearing the same type of uniform. That dude was a county sheriff officer. So it wasn't until 1975 when I made the realization that back in 1971, the Dunhams brought me to a Multnomah County Sheriff officer to toss candy bars at me. And it was 6 months later, I was once again watching TV, and there was a news segment, like a 30-second or 60-second news commercial on TV, and they were a news reporter was talking briefly with a county sheriff officer over something or another, and in the background they had a Multnomah County Sheriff seal, and I'm like, oh my God. Oh my God, that's what was on that camera Darlene Dunham was using back in 1971. And that's when everything clicked for me. That's when I made the realization that the Multnomah County Sheriffs and the Dunham family framed that neighbor in 1971 as a pedophile and made the realization that they used me in that operation. And then right after that, I realized, gee, this is why they were targeting me and every member of my family has spent years doing it. And I realized, gee, they weren't our friends. They weren't ingratiating themselves unto me and my family because they want to be friends. They were ingratiating themselves unto me and my family because they wanted to get me and my family into compromising situations and to affect and change and modify our lives. And by affecting change, they can actually frame me and my family for crimes and to vilify me and my family and to get me and my family into compromising situations that could either make us look bad or get us into situations that could get us killed. They were quite literally, after they framed the neighbor as a pedo, they were targeting me and my family, and they were trying to frame my mother right after that as a pedo. And I didn't realize it until I'm like 10 and a half, 11 years old. By then it was already too late. They've already destroyed my whole family. So sting ops are the lowest piece of form of life. in the entire United States of America. They're the biggest fucking criminals in this country is law enforcement and anybody connected to them. It's them that commit all the crimes, the staged crimes, and then they just blame their targets. They frame and blame their targets. I was a witness to one of their sting operations in 1971 and didn't know it and didn't realize it until 1975. And by then, they had already destroyed my entire life, my brother's entire life, my